Here's a bit of backstory. I'm a 16-year-old girl, and one cold winter night I was at home alone, watching TV. My parents had gone out to a dinner party at a friend's house. It had been snowing heavily all afternoon, but I felt nice and snug as I sat on the sofa in the lounge, tucked up under a warm, fuzzy blanket. By midnight, I noticed that my parents were still not home, so I began to worry and feel a little uneasy. I didn't want to call them in case they thought that I couldn't take care of myself. The television was in the corner of the room, right next to the big bay in the window. I was watching one of my favourite horrors. It was called Prom Night. When suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something moving in the bay window. Through the darkness and the falling snow, I could make out a figure of a man walking towards the window. As he got closer, I was able to make out his face, and it filled me with absolute horror. This man's face was hideously scarred. His eyes were wild and crazy, and he seemed to be grinning maliciously at me. Slowly, I pulled the blanket aside just enough to peer out with one eye. The man was still there. He was just standing there staring directly at me as snow fell behind him. He then reached into his coat and pulled something out. It was a long knife. I was so terrified at this point. I just pulled the blanket back over my head and hoped that the madman would think that it was just a pile of blankets sitting on the sofa. I managed to move my hand slowly over to my pocket and I took out my phone. Pressing the buttons in panic, I dialed 999 and held my breath as I waited for an answer. When the operator asked, "What is your emergency?" I put the phone close to my face and whispered, "There's a man outside my window. He's got a knife. Please come quickly." I sat there motionless under the blanket as the minutes ticked by. Eventually, I started to hear some sirens, then followed by the police banging on the front door. I pulled off the blanket and rushed to the front door, letting the two police officers inside. They said that they had seen no trace of anyone outside the house. He was right there, right outside the bay window. I pointed to where he was, and then the female officer told me that it wasn't possible. If there would have been anybody standing out there, then there would be footprints left outside, and this snow was completely undisturbed. After pleading with the two officers that I had saw this man with my own two eyes, they just put it down to my mind playing tricks on me, and maybe that I was paranoid because I was watching too many scary movies. As the officers turned to leave, all of a sudden, the female officer stopped dead in her tracks. She pulled back the sofa that I had been sitting on. Her jaw dropped and her eyes widened in shock. And the male police officer stood there and gasped, because on the carpet behind the sofa, there was a trail of wet footprints and a discarded knife. The female officer then said to me, "You weren't looking at the man outside the window. You were looking at his reflection. He was standing right behind you all along." It was a normal Saturday. I had woken up really early and decided just to be lazy all day. At around 10 PM, I decided to get into bed and watch some South Park. I had fallen asleep around midnight, I think, and the actual encounter happened very fast. I had woken up at about 4:43 AM with an overwhelming feeling of dread. It was dark, but it only took me a few seconds for my eyes to adjust to my surroundings. I looked at my clock, which was right next to the door, and I noticed a figure standing in the doorway, no more than 8 feet from me. He was staring at me with the sickest grin I have ever seen. The guy was a fucking monster, ugly and big as hell. I froze. I had no idea what was happening. I jumped out of bed after a few seconds and yelled, "Who is that?" Get the fuck out of here now. As I rushed to the door to slam it shut, the man slowly closed the door, still staring at me with that malicious grin. I locked the door and heard heavy footsteps walk away very slowly. This guy wasn't here to rob me, I can tell you that. The way he just shut my door was too calm for any two-bit thief that just got caught. I heard him walk to the basement door and then he left. I immediately called the cops and they showed up within minutes. They did a walkthrough of my house and just chalked it up to some drunk guy just wandering through houses. I told them that this guy could have been watching me for hours for all I knew, but they obviously dismissed it. They left and I woke up my floormate, a girl who was asleep throughout the whole ordeal. She had gotten in a few hours after I fell asleep, and she said she locked both the deadbolts and the normal lock. They were both unlocked. Well, it's a simple solution, I'll just change the locks, fine. But the thing that worries me the most is that this guy specifically came into my house. I don't know how he got in, and I don't know if he's watching me or someone in the house, but I am freaked out. I'm just glad that I woke up in time before he actually did something to me, and I still don't know what he had planned. I'm hoping that I never find out.